Welcome back to another Champions of the Content video. In today's video, I wanted to talk about Scarecrow and Millard, and I think that there's a big elephant in the room because there's, in my opinion, a big misconception about these two being quote-unquote bad and terrible. And I wanted to create an in-depth guide for both, for everyone to kind of see what makes them, have that perception in the community, and cover some of their pros, their cons, their kits, and try to let you guys decide on if they're really as terrible as people say. So looking at their stats, if you look on the left with Millard, his pros in my opinion is that he can do burst front row heals, but he really has some terrible cons, and they are that he only has one hit attacks. But the good news for Millard is that in terms of starting in the game, until we have more clerics come out in the future, he really is the best option for those burst front row heals. There is Simona, who's a 4-star cleric who can do, they have pretty similar kits. But Millard obviously has that big advantage because he's got the 5-star stats. Ramona has those 4-star stats. So it makes a big difference, and Millard can really pump out those numbers, whereas Ramona kind of suffers in that sense. And with Scarecrow, he has a lot of pros. He's the crit king to start off with. He has multi-attacks, he has AoE. His AoE can also be multi-hit. He's got wind and bow. But his cons, he has no party utility. And that can really make a big difference when choosing a character. All of his buffs are, limited to himself. But so he can't really, provide that utility to everybody else. So going to Millard's skills and passives, so he is a light elemental user. He has a staff, and he uses heals. And if you see, they're all one-time hits, and that really suffers. You can see, especially in longer fights, he's just not contributing in that way. He's really only there for heals. Most likely you would just keep him in the back row for the entire fight and just swap him when you need those heals. I mean, and even his buffs, I mean, full front row 15 magic defense, it can come in handy, so that's not too bad. But his single ally, defense buff, his single ally regen, it's just not worth it. Theo can do the regen for the whole party, and then he's got that 15%, which is only 5% less lower than the single ally, so you might as well just use that and just skip out on the defense. And then his passives, heals casted by Millard are 20% stronger, and it doesn't even include the regen. And when he takes an attack, restore SP equal to 3% of damage taken, which still isn't a lot, and hopefully you're not even keeping him in the front row that long to begin with. So he's going to get that 10% each turn when he's in the back to recover it. So, while I did say in the beginning that Millard isn't terrible, he just gets outclassed super fast. And the only reason really, in my opinion, that you would bring him in fights are those fights where the damage is too much and Theo's regen or Ramona's heals are just not doing it. So you would just swap him in, to cover Ramona for those heals. Alright, so looking at Scarecrow. Scarecrow is a bow user, and he self-buffs his attack and his crit, and he uses wind as an elemental. He can also do a self-heal, but I wouldn't really ever see a world where you would use that, because you would either have Theo's regens or another cleric's heals. But one thing that he really works well with is that he can chip away at shields. He's got the 4x wind and the 4x bow. And the bow is AoE, so multiple enemies being chipped away is perfect. And then the 4x wind is random, which is, I mean, if everybody is weak to wind, perfect. But if you're fighting a single boss and you're using the 4x wind, that's even better. That is a huge chip amount. And then his 3-star is also really good, a medium chance to inflict bleeding for 2 turns. And it's only 22 SP, and it's the 170 power. That's my favorite skill to use with him. I do have Scarecrow, and I bring him on every fight, and I think that he's really valuable, especially if they're weak to wind, especially if they're weak to bow. Pair him with Tressa for that wind, and you can really start chipping away at those shield points for wind. His self 20% damage up buff when attacking an enemy on break also super comes in handy. I mean, in my opinion, he's got strength like Fior does, especially if he's buffed either by himself or with Lynette. And then his 3-star passive is self 20% crit damage up. So if he has those crit up, that crit up buff, and then 20% higher if the crit hits, and then 20% more damage up if the enemy is in break. I've had him hit like 5,000 damage at one point. So, if you lower the target's defense and you buff up his attack and his crit like that, he can do numb bursts. So he really comes in handy, and he gets a bad rap. And I'm guilty of that too, because in my video I put him at the bottom. But in this next slide, let me talk about why I put him at the bottom. So are they both bad? No. Millard just becomes easily outclassed quicker than all of the other characters in the 5-star roster to start off with, but he can be useful in future instances with content. I won't go into too many spoilers until we get some notes about them coming out, but you know, he can be one of the clerics on that team that can really help. In Scarecrow, he's not bad, but the rest of the original 8, in my opinion, are just simply better choices to start with. And there are 2 hunters that are coming out, according to the JP timeline, if we follow it, who are really, really, really great contenders for having, you know, that one 5-star hunter on your team. When they come, you know, you'll kind of see why. And they both just, they provide, you know, a better sense and a better well-rounded hunter to the team. But Scarecrow, for now, if you have him, definitely get him in your party and start leveling him, because he will do numbers for sure. He was like a surprise for me. I never had him in JP, and when I pulled him here, you know, I built him. I started to get to know his kit and him as a character, and he's game changer for me. If you know, if the enemy's weak to bow, he really is pumping out those numbers. And you can already see here with his crit stat, it's 410, so that is really, really high. And his attack stat is only, I believe, 30 points lower than Fior. So, you know, he's got a lot going for him, and I was totally wrong with him, you know, when I had him at the bottom of the list. I still think that he can be at the bottom in terms of all the rest, but yeah, that I've definitely learned a lot about about my tier list that I created, and maybe some switches that I would make today if I had made that video now. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you have either of these 2, I wouldn't be upset about it. They both can provide good things in their own way. And if you have Scarecrow, I would say that, you know, he's probably the better option, you know, than if you have Millard and maybe you just don't want to use him and you've heard too much, you know, negative things to bring him to your party. But if you have Scarecrow, you know, throw him in, get him leveled. He's going to help you a ton, especially in this base game and a lot of these future patches that we have coming up since they released that roadmap. So let me know down in the comments below if you use either of these characters. Are you, you know, enjoying their kits? Do you regret pulling for them and wish that maybe you re-rolled instead? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.